And good evening, fellow voyagers of fantasy realms, and welcome to a slightly special evening actually tonight, because this is my launch stream for my latest book, which is all jolly exciting. So thank you very much for turning up. I do appreciate your company. I hope I didn't inflict too much pain and loathing on you with the rendition of the ZX Spectrum loading experience, one of the successful versions of the ZX Spectrum loading experience. Of course, if you want the true ZX Spectrum loading experience, you have to do that about 5 or 6 times while fiddling around with the volume controls of the cassettes. So, although generally, actually, to be fair to the poor old beast, the ZX Spectrum loading, if the cassette and the tape were actually in reasonably good order, it was actually reasonably reliable. But so there we go. So and Ice Mark says Doomdark was a fast loader. Thank you very much. I didn't know that. Maybe I had the wrong version there. I don't recall the fast loading. It's a long time ago. I do have the cassette with me, so one of these days I'm going to try it out and see if it actually still works. But I haven't dared put my my Doomdark cassette into a cassette player. Not that I've got a cassette player. I mean, where'd you buy a cassette player from nowadays that can actually plug into a Spectrum? Anyway, one of these days I'm going to have to get it out and try it and make sure it actually works. But anyway, welcome one and welcome all to Doomdark's Revenge. So here we are. So the book is out, so hopefully some of you have received it in paperback form. Today at some point, it may already have happened. The ebook version launches as well, so that may already have occurred. I'm not sure. Amazon never gives you a time; it just gives you a rough, vague indication. My car is sold. It has a cassette player. Actually, my car does have a cassette player too, but it's a long way to run a lead to a ZX Spectrum, right? Doomdark did have a fast loader on the C64 as well. Okay, so all little tidbits of the 8-bit age coming out. So I'm glad I've got a few experts on here who can set me right. So Chris is here, which is excellent, and Kelly Baglar's here as well, which is good. And anybody else who knows lots and lots of stuff about those really early 8-bit technologies, then you're very, very welcome to correct me when I make mistakes. So fingers crossed, I won't make too many of those. I did play the game back in the day. I hasten to add, I consider myself reasonably qualified, but it was a long time ago. So some of the details do fade away in the mists of legend after a little bit of time. So there we go. Anyway, so for those of you who aren't initiated, I think most of you on the stream will probably know what Doomdark's Revenge actually is, but for the uninitiated, what is it? Okay, so it's an adventure game. Okay. A very, from a perspective of today, an ancient, probably even legendary. It's that old. It's a long time ago. These games date from the early 80s, that. I'm casting my mind back. I was in 1984 when this game and the predecessor game first came out, which is called Lords of Midnight. I was the tender age of 13. It's just terrifying, really. It's a long time ago. So it's worth just casting your mind back, to be honest, as to what exactly the world was like back then. So we'll do that in a moment. Commander Jen on here. May I ask, how comes both Midnight Chronicles books are smaller size than all your other fantasy books? That is a very good question. I think it's a fantasy formatting thing. It's more of a mass paperback size, whereas the Shadewood ones are not the mass paperback size. I don't have a good explanation for you. I'll see if I can find one actually. So there, it is a thing. So yes, the Midnight novels, the Midnight Chronicle ones are in a mass paperback size. I do know that. Mad Monks offers 12. Chris, good evening to see you as well. So it was a long time ago. Let's go back to 1984. So the computers then that were being played were 8-bit. Okay, so this is the computer I'm using at the moment is 64-bit. Okay, now that shows you sort of some of the progression. Very, very, very primitive by the standards of today. Hugely, incomprehensibly smaller than the computers that we have today. The maximum amount of memory these computers has was basically 64 kilobytes in their original design, and they later on did some clever tricks to access a bit more memory. But by then, other stuff was happening as well. I'm a paperback writer. Someone's now humming. Excellent. Did that make the Morkin Sheriff storyline a bit X-rated for you? Ah, well, we'll come to that. So cast your mind back. Those of you who were there, and for those of you who weren't there, a little bit of a history lesson. Okay, so in the 70s, nobody had a computer, all right? Unless you were stupidly rich, all right? You didn't have a computer at home in the 70s, right? In the early, unless you were quite unusual, okay? The idea in the 70s of having a computer at home was just like, why would you need a computer? To what possible purpose could you put a computer? People had hi-fis. That was about the level of sophistication. Maybe a television, okay? Computers were, why would you want a computer at home? Okay. Now, I personally was fortunate. My dad was an electronics engineer. He built a computer in 1978 when I was 7, just about to become 8. And I remember very, very distinctly going into school saying, my dad's got a computer, the geeky kid is about to get beaten up in the classroom. To all which my sort of school chums were basically, no, you're not, Wagar, shut up. And so from period of about 78 to about 83, suddenly everybody had a computer, okay? Well, virtually everybody had a computer. Anybody that kind of was in the school playground basically had a computer. So in a few very, very short years, computers suddenly became everywhere, and you had a vast array of computers. So, on one hand, you had the Sinclair machines, the ZX80, the ZX81, the ZX Spectrum. You had the Commodore 64, and its predecessor, the VIC-20. You had the Acorn. Let me get this right way around. Which one's first, the Acorn Electron, or is that the second one? I get confused because the BBC. There's a cut-down version of the BBC called something. Is that the Atom? Or was the Electron first? I can never remember which way around it is. There's a BBC, there's an Atom, and then there's an Electron. And I'm not sure which... I get confused. It's around, so somebody will tell me, it's the Acorn... Okay, the Acorn Atom was first, right. And then the BBC came along, and then the Electron... Hang on now. Which way around, Kenny Bagler and Bog Rap? Which is the first one? Just let's sort this out, okay? Which is the first? Is it the Atom? BBC and then the Electron, says Mad Monks. Right, okay. So the Electron is the cut-down version of the BBC, the cheap version to compete with the Spectrum. I think that's right. So anyway, basically suddenly on the market, loads of 8-bit computers just appeared. And the Electron was the cut-down BBC, right? Okay, so the Atom was the initial one, and then the BBC, right? And there were various different kind of costs, right? So if you were cheap and your parents weren't particularly rich, you'd probably end up with a Spectrum, okay? If your parents were, quite posh and had lots of money, you'd probably have a BBC. And the Commodore 64 crowd was sort of somewhere in the middle, perhaps a bit more middle class with a bit more disposable income. So, that's kind of how the pecking order appeared in the playground. And there were lots of others. Okay, so things like, who remembers the Jupiter Ace and the Dragon 32 and the, was there an Olivetti in there? There were loads of things, and they most of them disappeared fairly quickly. We just wanted to be different. Posh kids had the BBC, yes. I think that's about right. So, the Auric 1, was that one that was programmed in 4th or something? Wintermute wasn't posh and had a BBC, so obviously you must have done lots and lots of Paperboy rounds or something. Dragon 32, yes. So there were lots of computers, okay. And in the 70s, if you wanted to play the new video games, you went to the arcades. Who remembers the arcades? When you used to go to a place to play video games. Okay, it was a big hall. We had one down in Folkestone called the Rotunda, which was just amazing. It was like a spaceship. Inside it was just full of video games, and inside there you had Space Invaders and Pac-Man and Defender and Centipede and all these other amazing original arcade games from that kind of era. And of course, you'd be shoveling I can't remember, was it 10 pence or, in America it would have been a quarter, I guess, 25 cents. In the UK it would have been 10p a go, or maybe even 20p a go if it was a new game. Scramble, yeah, Scramble. Defender was always my favourite. I was quite good at Defender. And we had video arcades. That's where you went to play video games. There's no concept of playing them at home back back in the late 70s, you went to the video arcade to play video games. And then suddenly these home computers started appearing. And, by the early 80s, around sort of 81, 82, they started getting good enough. They started having sound, and they had colour. And they were able to load games off a cassette. And people very quickly cottoned on to the idea that, we can rip off the video arcades. And so clones of Space Invaders and Pac-Man and Scramble and Centipede and Defender and all those other games appeared on the home these new home computers of the day. Now, the idea behind the home computers was we were all supposed to learn homework, learn programming and do homework on them. That never happened. Loads of people of my generation sold their parents on the idea that these computers, it'll definitely help with our homework and maths and science and stuff, right? We all knew, it's for games, right? Joust, yes, I remember Joust. Naughty Hill, hello there, good to see you as well. So, and the Atari 2600, I'm not sure what the timing of that was, but so there were video consoles just prior to this era, but the idea behind the 8-bit computers was they had keyboards. They could do more than just play games. And so to start with, basically it was like, well, hang on a minute, we can make clones of existing games, right? So rather than having to pay £10 every time you wanted to play Space Invaders, now you could just load it up a cassette and have as many goes as you like, assuming you'd bought the computer in the first place. So they kind of killed off the video arcade in some ways, or at least led to its demise over the years. These early computers were incredibly primitive by modern standards. They had very little in them compared to modern PCs. And the first round of games literally were just arcade rip-offs. In fact, they had, Ready Player One. That phrase that's the book and the film, etc., etc. Ready Player One is what the game said when you were putting the coin in. And the early games on these 8-bit computers didn't kind of change the way they worked. So you had 3 lives, a high score. You played for about 10 minutes, and that was it. And then eventually, games designers began to think, well, hang on a minute, we don't need to follow this model of putting coins in a machine, because there aren't any coins anymore on these 8-bit computers. We can save things to cassette, save positions again. We could design games that are more complicated, we don't need to follow this, put a coin in, play for 10 minutes and then beat the high score, try again. The games don't need to be like that anymore. And slowly people began to experiment. Now, there had been adventure games long before Lords of Midnight and Doomdark's Revenge, but they were very typically text-based. Okay, so probably the most famous one is just called Adventure. Interesting title. Who remembers the magic words pluff and I think it's Zizzy. Is it Zizzy? Anyway, there was basically on the mainframes and big computers at the time. There were these big text adventures where you had to, basically go north, look, type in your inventory, pick up the magic bottle, drop the magic bottle somewhere else, fight the dragon with the sword. Those sort of text-based adventures, literally just text, and you'd get a description of the room and all that sort of stuff. Look, all those kind of things. And Ultimate Play the Game. I mean, they made some amazing games on the ZX Spectrum, particularly. Zizzy, there we go. Wintermute GB does remember that. So so text adventures were very much a thing, but they were quite. A text adventure would have probably several hundred locations in it if it was a big one. But it was very limited. You basically get, you look and it basically say you are in a cavern. Exits are north, east, and west. And you go north, and it would give you another piece of description, basically saying you are now in a slightly different part of the cavern. Exits are south. There is a dead. There's a dead orc here or something like that. Those kind of adventures, okay, and those were ported onto these early computers as well to kind of, give people other things to sell. So it is dark here. Yes, examine this. All that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's right. And there was a lovely one where you're in a maze of twisty, windy little passages. You should try and map this in your head. It was horrible. Rub the brass lantern. All those kind of adventures. Some of you remember those kind of things. You were in the chat. Go north. There is a Drew here. Yeah, exactly right. So, and that's where it kind of was. Okay, that's where it kind of was. Now, just after this period of time was a golden little era. Didn't last very long, but it was a little golden era where because the computers were small and they didn't have much memory and much capability and the graphics were low resolution, there was a very small period of time where a single individual could write a new game from scratch, doing all the graphics, all the text, all the sounds, if there were any, the entire thing themselves. Okay, it was a small little golden period of time. You didn't need a team of developers. You could, if you were good enough, you could do it all yourself. And in the kind of mid-80s, towards the end of the 80s, was this period of time. And then after that, it all became much more kind of marketing-led. And you'd start seeing, franchises appear, like you'd see the official Ghostbusters game, or you'd see the various other bits and pieces, and it got much more kind of, I suppose, organised and more modern oriented in many ways. But in between the arcade games and the kind of commercial license phase was this golden period in between, where if you were a decent coder and you had a fantastic idea, you could make a bit of history. And Lords of Midnight and Doomdark's Revenge come from that era. They're probably, at least on the spectrum, certainly, the defining games of that platform at the time. And they hold a very special place for a number of technical reasons. So let me just show you. Okay, I want to show you the comparison. So I'm going to switch to my trusty ZX Spectrum emulator to show you where we were and where we got to. So let's go here. So if I just switch on, where's it gone? Hang on a minute. I'm just gonna go back to my start screen because I've cocked up on my display. Hang on a minute. I'll be back. I'm still here. Right. Hang on. There we go. There we go. Right. So okay. So this is actually Doomdark Revenge. I'm going to go back to where is it? Why can't I find it? Oh, rats. I'm going to have to... Hang on a minute. I'm just going to have to get this downloaded. I need to put it into the wrong system. Bear with me. I will be back in just a moment. Hang on a minute. Here we go. This is Blue Peter, for those of you who remember this. Press play on tape. Yes. That's exactly what it is. Right. Right, here we go. I want that in that directory over there. There we go. Right. Now we're back. Okay. Oh no. It's going to load it slowly. Hang on a minute. Let me switch it to fast load because we haven't got all evening. Enable fast loading. Don't you love emulators? Boom, boom, boom. Right, okay, so this is the Hobbit, okay? Let me make this a little bit bigger, just so you can kind of get the effect of the game. There we go, that's looking all right. So this is actually a pretty good text game of the era. Okay, so this is 1982. This is just a little bit before Lords of Midnight. So basically here we are. You know the story of the Hobbit, right? And what you got actually this was relatively advanced. This was quite a revolutionary game itself at the time. You got some graphics. Okay, there's a bit of colour. You're in a comfortable tunnel-like hall, and but it's a classic adventure. Okay, so to the east there's a round green door. You see a wooden chest. Gandalf is carrying a map. There's Thorin here. Gandalf gives the curious map to you. So I can't even type properly. Examine the map, right? And it tells me, you examine the map. There seem to be some symbols on it, but you can't read them. Okay, so Gandalf opens the green door. You can wait. Time passes. Gandalf goes east, so let's go east. And we go east, and we're in a gloomy, empty land, right? It takes ages for the screen to draw. This isn't even 1 frame per second. This is like 1 frame every 20 seconds or something like that. And some quite day-glow colours from the Spectrum. They're very, very bright. But actually this game kind of was one of the first ones to have NPCs in some ways, because you have Gandalf and he does things. Look, Gandalf takes the curious maps. He's just pinched your map. Okay, Thorin enters. Now if we wait long enough, Thorin will start singing about gold. Gandalf says, "What's this?" "I don't know, Gandalf, what is it?" Gandalf closes the door, there we go, and Thorin sits down and starts singing about gold. Okay, so there's very, very limited, but for the time, quite impressive, like little NPC interaction. Okay, very, very rare. Now, if we go east again, we end up in the Trolls clearing. You know the story of the Hobbit, right? It's pretty straightforward. There's a hideous troll here with a key, and a vicious troll, and the trolls start talking to each other. So what you have to do to get past this little part of the edge, if I stay here, the trolls will eat me. So what I actually have to do is I have to go north. Okay, and I'm on a hidden path with trolls' footprints. We'll just wait for the screen to draw. Spoilers, spoilers for the Hobbit. Apologies for that. There we go. It's all coming back to me now. Now, what we have to do now, of course, is we have to wait. And we wait a little bit of time. Thorin keeps up with us, fortunately. And then we wait a little bit more. And eventually, day dawns. Okay, so if we now go south, we're in a clearing with 2 stone trolls. Okay, so that's how you begin to beat the adventure and so on and so forth. So spoiler alert for anybody who doesn't know how the trolls are killed, but there we go. Okay, and then then there's a large key. So of course you can take the key. You take the large key, and then that helps you unlock things. You figure out how it's going to work. That was what adventure games were. Okay, in 1982, and this is a good one. Okay, but it's got maybe 40, 50 locales in it, which is basically the entirety of Middle Earth from The Hobbit, in 50 locations. Okay, and each location, not all locations have a picture, but some of them do. Each location has a little bit of description. You can take things, you can unlock things, you can climb things, you can drop things, you can attack things, and Thorin will sit down and start singing about gold. Okay, he does that a lot. That's about all Thorin really does in this entire game. So so that's kind of what it was. That's what an adventure game was. Now, contrast this with the box art for The Lords of Midnight, which is the first game in this sequence. All right, so I have it here. Let me go back to full screen. The full camera is here. Okay, so this is The Lords of Midnight. Okay, Spectrum in 48K. Look at that. There is a lovely piece of artwork. Look, you can even see there's down here. Look, it's the original price still on there, $9.95, which is a fortune back in 1984. And if we have a quick look in here, you get all sorts of interesting things. You get a novella, okay, that's quite cool. You get a keyboard overlay, which tells you which keys to press, and you also, there's the actual. There you go. There's the actual cassette of the Lords of Midnight itself. That's what came in the box, and a quick peruse of the instructions. I think if I can find the right bit. Where is it actually in here? So it as you would expect, it kind of bigs itself up a little bit. It's marketing, but here we go. It basically says an introduction. Okay, The Lords of Midnight is not simply an adventure game, nor simply a war game. It's a new type of game we've chosen to call an epic game. The publishers like the word epic a lot. For as you play The Lords of Midnight, you will be writing a new chapter in the history of the peoples of the free. Okay, now there's lots of other stuff in there, but one of the key things that jumped out very, very early on when people were reviewing was the following. Looking into the distance, you will see the mountains and forests and the hills and lands of midnight. You will see armies camped on the plains, great citadels rising in the distance, the forlorn ruins of long-forgotten fortresses. And if you wish to see what lies beyond that mountain range and beyond that dark forest, you must move forward and look for yourself. We've called this unique feature landscaping, for it gives you the power to journey through the landscape of midnight in the very same way as any traveller or captain of war. As you move forward and your path twists and turns, the landscape changes just as it would as if you were really walking through midnight. And to achieve this effect, the Lords of Midnight program can create no less than 32,000 panoramic different views. And you're kind of like, hang on, wait, instantly you're kind of like, wait, what? 32,000? And you're thinking, hang on a minute, how can they do 32,000 views? Because there isn't enough space in the computer to do that. And that was one of the early things I remember thinking, what do you mean 32,000 views? That's impossible. But it was true. Okay, it was true. And to show you how it was done and what that actually meant is as follows. Let's go away from The Hobbit. We're going to go back to Lords of Midnight now. So this is the first game, with a book for which is already out. Why was it so remarkable? Well, what you actually got within the confines of an 8-bit computer, obviously, was first person. Okay, you got first person. So here is Luxor. He's standing at the Tower of the Moon, looking southeast, and all he can see is all he can see. All right, that's it. There's nothing else there. The text on the screen is very, very minimal. It just tells you where you are. It doesn't say, which way you have to go. It doesn't tell you which way the exits are, because you can go any way you can go. So I can look north. Okay, so I'm now looking north. I'm looking east, and the update is much faster than The Hobbit as well. I'm looking south, and there's some dragons there. I obviously don't want to go that way. Or I'm looking west. Which way do I go? I don't know. All I get is, and again, go back to the full camera frame. All I get is a map. Okay, this is the Land of Midnight, and it doesn't take you too long to figure out that this is the start location. Okay, there's the Tower of the Moon, and that is, other than an interesting novella that tells you a bit about the characters and what your kind of quest is, you're left on your own. Okay, you've got to figure out what to do next. So do I go east? Do I go south? What do I do? So if I go east, let's face east. I think it's Q to move. Yes, muscle memory is still there. Okay, so I've now moved. If I look back at the direction I've just come from, there are my other characters that I can control. They're still at the tower, waiting for me to tell them what to do. And I can think. So here's Luxor having a bit of a muse. 7 hours of the day remain, and Luxor is utterly invigorated. The ice sphere is very mild, and Luxor is utterly bold. He has with him the moon ring. So he has an item, the moon ring, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And 7 hours of the day remain. So there's a timer. Okay, so if I move again, if I can get back to the screen. Do I have to go through that to get back to... How do I look again, Chris? I don't want to... No, seat won't do me any good. How do I get back to look? I have lost the screen capture. I have. Sorry, I'm looking in the wrong place. Apologies. There we go. I can't... Oh, now I've pressed night as well. Anyway, I'll let it think about that. EOR, ice mark. Okay, sorry, apologies about that. I was looking in the wrong keys. The key thing with Lords of Midnight is a technique called landscaping, where your character is determines exactly what they can see. They can look in all cardinal directions of the compass: north, south, east, west, and all the bits in between. All you could see. Everything else about what was going on out there was a mystery, until you is it G? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so let's move again. I'll move a little bit further. So we end up in the forest, and then we can see out into the rest of the landscape. And as I move across the landscape changes. And eventually I run out of movement for the day, and it's night time for that character. I can swap to another character and so on. And each character can meet other characters and do other things. And the gameplay takes place on a huge, certainly for the time, potential gaming space. And they can interact, and they have different strengths and weaknesses. So we have Morkin, we have Corleth the Fey, and we have Roffer on the Wise, who's sort of kind of a wizard. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, because that's important too. So the first game sets up this amazing scene, okay? For 1984, this is quite a revolutionary approach, okay? So thousands of views where we used to just 50. a game that you can't just play. You can get killed fairly early on, but if you play it well, you play for hours and hours and hours and hours. You have to save your position to cassette, which takes quite a long time if you want to continue the next day. So it's a game that encourages you to play for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. So here's Rothron the Wise. It's dawn and Rothron is utterly invigorated. There's lots of subtle little touches in here as well, which are important. So you don't have a character's health bar. No, this was much more sophisticated. And in fact, we've lost some of this in modern games, actually. Rothron is utterly invigorated. That means he's got full health, okay? So occasionally he'll be quite invigorated, maybe, 90%. He'll get quite tired, if you keep making him ride across the landscape without a break. And eventually he'll become utterly exhausted, and he can't move. The ice sphere is another dynamic. So basically, the ice sphere is a very it's quite annoying when you're playing the game. It's a very clever dynamic. It's basically how well the enemy is doing on one part. So the worse you do, the stronger the ice sphere becomes. And if the ice sphere gets too strong in a particular locale, some of your characters will not answer your commands because they're too terrified. Okay, they're just too scared. And you can play around with this because if you start winning, then the ice sphere starts to retreat. But you can also sort of move the ice sphere off by doing various different pieces, which are kind of revealed in the story. So there's some very, very clever dynamic thinking in here. And Mike Singleton, the guy who wrote these games, had in some ways and alas, I never met him. I would love to have met him, and a few people on here, including Chris, have actually met him and worked with him in extensive video. But he was an English teacher first and foremost before he became a computer games developer. And it shows in the way there's a sudden grandeur to the text. Okay, Rothron the Wise, he stands at the Tower of the Moon looking northeast to the Forest of Shadows. There's this epicness to the text. And the fact that there isn't a stamina bar, but instead you get this, it is dawn, Rothron is utterly invigorated. It's much more dynamic. There is no sound in this game at all. There's no music, there's nothing. The computer didn't have space for it. It's just literally the graphics. And this very sparse but very flavourful text. And that is how this game was presented, and it's a very big departure from the kind of text-based adventures that we had at the time. Completely revolutionary type of gameplay, and very, very, very compelling once you got into it. And as you walk through, the landscape, you walk through the forests, and the mountains appear in the distance, and you slowly get close to the mountains, but you don't quite make it that day, so you have to wait to the next day. But there could be some, baddie armies waiting around the corner, maybe a day's march from you. You don't know because you can't see that far. There's a lot of tension and all sorts of things going on in the game that contributed to an amazing atmosphere in here. Now, the basic premise. Now, we do need to talk about this because this is an interesting thing. Okay, the basic premise of this is Luxor the Moon Prince. Okay. Now, he doesn't know he's the Moon Prince as the story starts, okay? So it's revealed to him along the way that he's this legendary Moon Prince who can lead the armies of the free, as they're called, the sort of men of midnight. Now, the backstory is that Doomdark, or the Witch King, depending on how you want to refer to him, he's the bad guy, clearly. He has cursed the land of midnight into an eternal winter, and Luxor has to defeat him. Luxor doesn't know this at the beginning of the story, but it's revealed to him along the way by a certain Rothron the Wise. Now, Rothron the Wise is he's never referred to as a wizard, okay, but he's an old guy on a horse with a staff, okay, quite sort of wizardy. And he clearly has some sort of sort of magic powers. So that's Rothron the Wise. Now, alongside the men of Middle-earth are a different race called the Fae. Okay, and here's Corleth the Fae, and they like the forests. All right, they like the forests, and they live in the forests, and I guess they do sort of foresty things, and they like greens and blues and foresty sort of colours, and they're a little bit estranged from the men of midnight. Okay, so that's the Fae, and then Luxor has a son who is called Morkin, and Morkin just happens to be immune to the ice sphere. Okay, they happen to be immune from the ice sphere, and That's revealed as well as part of his sort of thing, and he has to go on a quest to destroy Doomdark's source of power. In order to free Midnight from the effects. So on one hand, you've got Luxor, who's trying to assemble an army to counter the military might of Doomdark, which is hell bent on destroying Midnight. And on the flip side, you've also got Morkin, who's got a sort of quest to go and destroy Doomdark's source of power, which is called the Ice Crown, which is where the Ice Sphere comes from. And it just so happens that in order to control all these characters, as you probably saw earlier, Luxor has a moon ring. All right. So you may be thinking, hang on a minute. I've heard this story before somewhere. And to be fair, you would be right. Okay. So Luxor is very much a sort of Aragorn, son of Arathorn type of thing. Rothron, I think you probably joined the dots. Okay. Morkin is kind of a bit Frodo-ish. And I suppose Corleth is rather kind of Legolas. He's in style. So there's very, very, very strong influences here. Okay, so there's an evil baddie who's hell bent on destroying the entire landscape. Okay, there's a plucky bunch of adventurers who are going to find different ways to get them down there. The plucky underdogs, the heroes with everything stacked against them, and yet they win. Okay, so there is quite a lot in here that is quite derivative, but in Mike's defence, from a kind of narrative perspective, what he did is he took a very strong essence of what was good about the Tolkien-esque landscape, the epic struggles, the quests, and various other, and put that into a computer game that was way better than any of the official Lord of the Rings, Hobbit, Tolkien-esque type things. The kind of the official license stuff. We saw what the Hobbit looked like. This is an entirely different type of game, really. And also there was a Lord of the Rings that came out for Spectrum, but it was a pale shadow of what this game achieved. So in many ways, this is the definitive kind of Tolkien-esque fantasy adventure for these computers, because it's actually the best one out of all of them. And yes, you can certainly, if you're kind and charitable, you can say yes, there's several Tolkien-esque influences. And if you're perhaps a little bit less charitable, you say, well, they've just pinched Lord of the Rings, made it snowy, and changed all the names. And it's not, that's being a bit unfair. But you can kind of see where it's coming from. You can see why it's an epic military struggle. It's a desperate quest. There's a dragon in there. There's a few other characters as well that look very similar to some sort of Tolkien-esque counterparts. But it's a very, very compelling game. And then we move on. Okay, so the key thing about this is what Michael Singleton did here is he did this entire game himself. Okay, so the graphics that you see in here, primitive though they are, there's a sprite scaling system. There's the landscape generation system, the map, everything that's in here, the combat rules, everything that's in here. One person did this. Okay, one person. There's no team here. There's one person doing all this. It's a very Mike did later make an official Lord of the Rings games. Yes, I know a little bit about that. I must dig into that a little bit more. So there's all sorts of stuff that's going on here. So clearly Mike was a huge fantasy fan. You can sense that straight away in here. And everything in there, he did this. So the text, the description, the characters, such as they are, they have this amazing sense of joined upness. It's very consistent. There's huge integrity in the way it all kind of slots together and works, and it makes for a fantastic gaming experience and a sophisticated gaming experience. The game does not hold your hand. It's pretty brutal. When you first play this game, you lose often and you lose fast, all right, because what happens within the first few days is Doomdark's armies just swarm out of the north and overwhelm you, and you're kind of like, this game's impossible. Until you start to think of actually clever strategy. You can't just wade in and hope for the best. You will lose. So it's a proper thinking game. And once you know how to beat it, it's fairly straightforward to do so. But to start with, it was overwhelmingly difficult. some of you, Drellian's also mentioned the heraldry in the game. So you've got these lovely heralds. So you can see Luxor is a moon prince, and he has the symbol of the moon and a star. If you look at Morkin, he has a moon and two. I'm not quite sure what they were. They were droplets. Chris, maybe you know on this. I can't remember. Are they droplets of something, or are they something else? Corleth, for example, most of the Fae have this eagle shape. They're tears. Okay, tears. There we go. Ice mark. Most of the Fae have an eagle. Okay, Rothron has an eye, which is unique to him, I believe, and one other character, but it also has an eagle as well. So the heraldry of the different characters is reflected in these symbols as well. There's lots of nice little touches like that which identify which characters got what allegiance and so on and so forth. And that story's obviously been told. So we're supposed to be talking about Doomdark's Revenge. I haven't got there yet. This is the original game in 1984. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but Doomdark's Revenge came out almost straight away afterwards. Within 6 months, or was it 8 months or something? Certainly within a year. So Mike Singleton by comparison here, let's just compare the effort here. It was 6 months, says Icemark. There we go. So having written one game, and I don't know how long he took to write this, but I would suspect it was within a year. Within 6 months of this one coming out, another game had come out. 6 months. Okay, another complete game. Contrast that with my efforts. It took me 2.5 years to write the first book and 3 years to write the second. So in the time it takes me to write a book, Mike still could have knocked out 6 or 7 games. Okay, it's just like, okay, wow. So an impressive output. Okay, 5 months. There you go, 5 months to write Lords of Midnight from beginning to end, and then 6 months for Doomdark's Revenge. So within a year, both games written. Okay, both games. It's insane. I don't know how you do it. Doomdark's Revenge was written in about 4. Obviously, presumably you're starting with some stuff from Lords of Midnight, but I know I'm a slacker. Yeah, I am. Compared to that output, I am. The only thing I will say in my defence is that my books are considerably longer in length, in number of characters, than the amount of text that's in the entire game of Lords of Midnight, but that's probably not a fair comparison. So you can see there's a mock Tolkien style. Okay, so Lords of Midnight is kind of very like Lord of the Rings in many ways. And I don't know, again, maybe Chris can say in the chat whether Mike originally intended there to be a sequel, or whether he was surprised by the reception of Lords of Midnight and the publisher, basically Beyond as it was, said, we want some more stuff because that one sold very well. What else have you got? And I don't know if that's is that the case? That's a good question. But Lords of Midnight was a massive success. Okay, nobody had seen anything like it. The reviews came back saying this is just absolutely staggeringly good. It's a brilliant game. There were going to be 7. He should have knocked those out in 3.5 years, of course. But actually, we'll get to the Doomdark's bit in a minute. But the manuals make references to some of the other versions, which alas, sadly, never happened. But only 2 initially, and then he kind of Lucas reviewed. 7. Wow, we did miss out, didn't we? Because we kind of got 2, and we'll talk about a little bit what happened afterwards there in a bit. So Lords of Midnight, kind of Lord of the Rings, with a few modifications. Obviously, we wrote the book about that. Now, you may be thinking, well, why these books? Why these books in the first place? Okay, so why did we go back to 1984 to write a book? Well, let me show you again from here. Okay, back in the day, and I remember this very clearly. Right, let me just go to the other mode again. Apologies, there we go. Right, so we're back here. This is the manual. Okay, this is the manual. Now, most of the manual is actually a novella. Okay, so it basically introduces the characters. There's chapter 1, Luxor and Morkin, and it goes on to introduce some other characters, the Sculptor in there, and Corleth the Fae, we've already mentioned him. So it's huge in terms of its scene setting. Okay, but right at the back, it basically says here. Where is it? A novel prize. There's an exciting and completely unique prize being run in conjunction with the Lords of Midnight. Using the copy feature of the game, which allows you to basically print out your screen, we are running a competition which will turn the first player to defeat Doomdark into a fully fledged fantasy novelist. All right? Oh yeah, you had to read, Glenn, back in the day. I know. It's a very high bar for computer games. Mike Singleton has already set the scene to the Lords of Midnight in this booklet and mapped out this wintry land and its fascinating inhabitants. By copying the screens as you go through the game, your adventures through Midnight and your encounters with the foul hordes of Doomdark will be recorded in pictorial collection of scenes from the game. Okay. A collection of these will include the final winning screen when either you defeat Doomdark in his home citadel or steal away the Ice Crown, and will make you the co-author of a fantasy novel based around your adventures in Midnight and the successful quest against Doomdark. Okay, you will get a copy of the book and, of course, a share of all royalties. If you are the first to defeat Doomdark, you will have had a hand in creating the first ever computer-generated novel. Send your entries to us. A postcode that still exists, but alas, Beyond Software is no longer there. But be warned, the quest will be long and the route hazardous. So what they basically did is the competition for the first player to win this was to have their play session turned into the official Lords of Midnight novel. And I remember distinctly reading that at the time, thinking, wow, how cool would that be? Okay, how cool would that be? Alas, it never happened. It never happened. And that's one of those sort of things that just, alas, slowly faded away over time. How long did it take the first player to win it? Not very long. Chris might be able to jump in with that little snippet of fact. I think it's probably only a few weeks. Because they completely, and both times actually, they did the same with Doomdark. They completely underestimated the dedication of all those 13, 14, 15-year-old teenagers who should have been studying for their O-levels but weren't. They were playing computer games instead. Less than a month. There we go. Boom! Competition done. And people were sending in reams and reams of printer paper hoping to be the person who got the novel done. But alas, I don't know what... I know what happened in the case of the Doomdark's Revenge winning entry, but we've never quite established, I don't think, what happened to the winner of Lords of Midnight, whether they got acknowledged or whether they got something else. Again, maybe Chris might be able to tell us. I know what happened with Doomdark, but I don't know what happened to the winner of Lords of Midnight, because presumably there was one. I have been given an email, at least an image of a letter that was received by somebody who did enter the Lords of Midnight competition and was told that the prize had already been won. But the novel never appeared. Okay, the novel never appeared. And many, many years later, a chance conversation which led me to Chris, and we talked about it, resulted in the Lords of Midnight novel actually being created after all these years. So it's funny for me in the sense that I was a 13-year-old schoolboy thinking, wouldn't it be cool to have a Lords of Midnight novel? And completely unaware that when I was in my late 40s, I would actually be writing it. So there we go. The competitions were won before the C64 versions were even released. So iSmart doesn't know, no real knowledge. I think they were given some cash. Okay. Have some money, go away. It's a bit of a game thing. So it felt like unfinished business, I suppose, to a degree. And the stars aligned, and Chris and I were able to collaborate on creating this. And Chris kind of is the lore master. He decides what's happening, what isn't happening. I come up with some ideas, and he sort of basically says yes or no. And then I try and dramatise it, and that's kind of how we work. It works very, very well. It's really, really cool. And that's Lords of Midnight. Okay, so quite Tolkien-esque, quite the way it's structured, the characters within it. And actually, interesting enough, when you look at it, a few things do jump out at you. It's entirely 100% male cast in the Lords of Midnight. Which does look a little bit odd nowadays. I mean, Lord of the Rings was almost entirely a male cast as well, with a few female characters, which the films tried to bring out a little bit more than were actually in the book. But there were none at all in Lords of Midnight, which is something that we thought was a little bit unbalanced, trying to write a story in the 21st century. Now, there are some female characters in the lore, and we get to it. But that's 1984. The first game is out. We wrote the novel of it much, much later on. And then we come to Doomdark's Revenge, which, of course, is very similar in look and feel, but quite a different game. And the first question that I think Chris and I really wrestled with here was, okay, what's the story of this game? What's the canon? What's the actual definitive version of events? Because with Lords of Midnight, it was pretty straightforward. Okay, it was Luxor is assemble the armies, get the Free and the Fae on side, attack Doomdark, destroy Doomdark. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. Big battle, epic adventures. Morkin has to go on a quest to destroy the Ice Crown. In order to destroy the Ice Crown, he has to gather some things and go to a certain place. And it's Frodo's quest for the ring, destroying the ring. It's how these sort of things work. And so it was quite formulaic. One of the biggest things we struggled with Lords of Midnight really was saying, how are we going to differentiate this from Tolkien? Because we've got so many elements here that are very, very Tolkien-esque, and we don't want to just do Lord of the Rings. We have to do something different. So we were struggling all the way through to try and find ways just to make it a bit different and capitalise on what I call the Mike Singletonness of the experience, so that makes sense. Do your books, in a sense, give away a means to win the game? Well, possibly there'll be some clues, but it's more a sort of telling of a gameplay experience, I would say. Command Terraformer Clint. There would be clues in it, I'm sure, but I'm not sure they'd be all that helpful in helping you win the game, because they don't tell you go north, go east, go west, or recruit this army, that sort of stuff. It's a sort of telling of things. So Lords of Midnight was quite straightforward to write, but the biggest challenge was, how do you differentiate it from Lord of the Rings? That was a big thing for us. Whereas when we came to Doomdark's Revenge, this happens immediately afterwards. Okay, so it's a straight segue into the next story, and a few things have been established at the end of the Lords of Midnight. So for those of you who haven't actually read Lords of Midnight yet, you might there's spoilers here. Okay. Because in order to talk about Doomdark's Revenge, we do need to talk about the end of Lords of Midnight. And at the end of Lords of Midnight, spoilers, the evil baddie is defeated. Okay, you will not be surprised to realise this. Doomdark is defeated. He is killed. He's destroyed. His evil has been vanquished, and there is much rejoicing. Okay. And just as the Free and the Fae and Luxor is reunited with Morkin, and Corleth comes up and says, "Yes, we did a good job. We've defeated it." Then suddenly a warning is received from some far off land to the north, basically saying, actually somebody else is now very, very upset and is moving against you. And it turns out that our evil baddie Doomdark had a daughter. Okay, he had a daughter, and surprise, surprise, she is even more evil and nasty than he was, and yet she's far to the north, and our heroes don't know anything about it. But a warning comes in about her, and it turns out that she's incredibly upset that you killed, or Luxor killed in this case, Doomdark. Okay, so she basically she's so evil that she wanted to kill her father herself. Okay, so not only is she evil and alike to her father, but she's so evil that she had planned his demise as well. And now that you've basically stolen her desire from her in killing her father, she not only wants to kill you, clearly, but she also wants to ravage all the lands and so on and so forth. So that's the sort of setup for Doomdark's Revenge. Not only is evil not vanquished, that there's even more evil to deal with, and it's in the form of this woman called Shareth the Heartstealer, and she's the antagonist of Doomdark's Revenge. And Doomdark's Revenge is a curiously named story, or game as it originally was, because Doomdark isn't in it. He's already dead. It's actually kind of Sheriff's vengeance is probably the best way to describe it. Not really mad that you killed her father, just upset that you did it before. That's how evil she is. So that's basically the setup. And in order to, because in the game, what happens is the backstory basically says that Sheriff the Heartstealer kidnaps Luxor's son Morkin, and basically threatens to turn him against Luxor and then to invade all the lands of Midnight and kind of ransack everything. My name is Sheriff the Heartstealer. You killed my father. Prepare to die. It's kind of like that, actually. Yes. I'm going to kill you because you killed my father, which I want to do. Wintermute, I'm going to allow that through. Believe it or not, the auto mod on my stream has flagged you up as a potentially dodgy person saying killing my father. So I've just allowed that. It's okay. I'm going to kill you. Trigger the sensors, Wintermute. So you've got to be careful there, my friend. So that's the setup. Okay, that's the setup. And this second game is much more. Is totally different to Tolkien. Okay, it's a fantasy realm. It reuses the characters from the previous story, but there's nothing like this setup in Tolkien at all. So this, in some ways, was a much more fun book to write because we could kind of go, this time we're not doing Tolkien. Okay, we're not doing Tolkien. We're doing something new. And it was, there's a sense of freedom in that. But the question was when we started looking at the game, and here's the game, Doomdark's Revenge, just so you can have a good look at it. This is again my copy of it, a little bit more battered than my copy of Lords of Midnight. I'm ashamed to say, but that's the box art and everything else. Unfortunately, it's slightly transparent because of the colouring. You can actually see through it. Look how weird. But Doomdark's Revenge is not so Tolkien-y, okay, because it's another type of story. But if you look in the manual and you compare the game conditions in Lords of Midnight, basically the win condition is either you kill Doomdark or you destroy his ice crown. So either of those will allow you to win the game. All right. In Doomdark's Revenge, there are many choices. In fact, it's kind of reversed. Basically, the computer who's playing Sheriff the Heartstealer, all she has to do is kill you, Luxor the Moon Prince, okay? That's her aim, and that's all she has to do. So the win condition for the computer, if you like, is dead straightforward. However, the win conditions for you, the player, as Luxor, are multiple, okay? So you can get into the Ice Mark, you can sneak across, rescue Morkin, hightail it back out, and that counts as a win. Okay, you can go and defeat Sheriff in military battle and wipe her off the face of the planet. Come back and I suppose I don't know. Actually, maybe you can. It says here the most basic victory that can be achieved is the rescue of Morkin, Luxor's son. Okay, so that's the most basic win. But there are other levels of victory that if you achieve certain things in the game, you achieve a greater level of victory. You could go and kill Sheriff, you could go and create some mighty armies, you could go and recover a whole bunch of magical items, okay, and you could bring those kind of things all back. So the first question that Chris and I started discussing really early on was, okay, so what's the actual story? What's the definitive telling of this game? Because when you play Doomdark's Revenge, sometimes you'll play it straightforwardly and you'll encounter Sheriff and you'll have a big battle and hopefully you defeat her and then yay, yeah, we won. Sometimes you'll play it and you'll be organising your armies and then suddenly you'll get a notification from the game that Sheriff has been killed. Yay! And and it was nothing to do with you. And the reason for that is this game has a very different structure. So in Lords of Midnight there were the Free and the Fae, and they basically didn't do anything. They stayed put until one of your characters rocked up and basically said, hey, we need you for the war against Doomdark. Okay. And they then would follow your directions. In Doomdark's Revenge, all of the characters do their own thing. So they go off wandering on their own little side quests, and you rock up at their city and they're not there, okay, because they've gone off somewhere. And as a result, it's a very dynamic gameplay, and it changes a lot all the way through. You've got 5 different races. So you've got barbarians, you've got dwarves, you've got giants, you've got ice lords, you've got the fae. And they all have their own agendas, and they're all doing their own things, which means that, as you know, the game, every time you play it, is a totally different outcome. Okay, sometimes you can defeat Sheriff, sometimes somebody else defeats Sheriff, and you don't even get to see her. You know, maybe you get to rescue Morkin, or maybe you get killed on the way trying to get there. There's all sorts there's all sorts of complexities in it, which make it quite hard to figure out exactly what the definitive telling is. So that was one of the first things we struggled with, is again, what's actually the story? Now, fortunately, Mike Singleton had left us with his sort of plans for the subsequent games. And you know, some work had been done on those kind of things, and as a result of that, we knew what the kind of definitive end of the story was, and you know, a few other bits of lore that happened after it. So we had to kind of make a route between how we knew it started and how we knew it ended, and decide what happened in the middle. And then that was basically, you know, the challenge to kind of try and work that out. This game is even bigger than Lords of Midnight. So Lords of Midnight had these 32,000 views. I think I'm right in saying that Doomdark's Revenge now has 48,000 views. And whereas the original game had, I think, 32 characters, Chris will be able to tell me one way or the other, this one has 128, okay? Which is simply an insane number of characters. There we go, 49,152, very precise, well done. Is that 48k? I don't know my maths. That sounds like it might be. Okay, 32 characters and 128 characters. So that was one of the hardest things that I found to do, because 128 characters, I'm sorry, is just too many. Okay, I could not include 128 characters in a single book. It was impossible to do that. And as a result, we've had to choose which characters we've given significant parts to, in order to manage that effectively. So when you get the book, you'll notice there's a section at the beginning called Dramatis Personae, which is just Latin for the cast, and which tells you which characters actually are significant in the story, so you can kind of keep tabs on them. There are still a lot, almost too many to manage in a single novel, but we had to strip them down to the ones that we felt most often came up in conversation, i.e. had memorable names. There's some that just seem to lend themselves to kind of either notoriety or memorability or whatever it happens to be. There's a few names that jump out as those ones we've got to have because they feel like they're more important characters in the game. And sometimes that's just down to the fact that you tended to encounter them more because they were closer to you geographically in the game. You could not include 128 characters. I could do that in the tweets. Yeah, very good. Now there are also so we got Sheriff the Heartstealer this time. So we have a lady baddie, and unlike Doomdark, who doesn't actually visibly appear in Lords of Midnight, he's just sort of assumed to be in one of the citadels. Sheriff the Heartstealer in the game moves around. You get to actually meet her. She's a character who moves around in the game. And her foil, if you like, is a young lady called Tarathel the Fae, who is engaged to Morkin, and he's stolen away on the night of the wedding in the story, and she sort of comes out of nowhere in Doomdark's Revenge. There's no preamble to why she's there. So Chris and I sort of backtracked a little bit on that and introduced her into the Lords of Midnight, as many of you will have noticed, to make sure that she had a bit more of a backstory than suddenly just, oh, here's a girl, and we're going to get married, excellent, which seemed a little bit forced. So we had to wind it back a bit, and that's why Tarathel the Fae and in fact Sheriff the Heartstealer have small parts to play in the Lords of Midnight, because we felt it was important to bring them into the story early enough that it would make sense and feel a bit more natural when they appeared in Doomdark's Revenge, because obviously they have central roles in the second book. So some of that sort of stuff is in there as a result of that. there are 5 races, 128 characters. All the characters are also moving around. So whereas in Lords of Midnight you had the Free, who are basically the good men, and the Fae, who are basically the good kind of elves, and the Doomguard, who are basically the baddie armies. Okay, in Doomdark's Revenge you've got all sorts of different sort of political factions. So you have the barbarians, you have the dwarves, you have the giants, you have the ice lords, and you have the Fae, and some of them are good and some of them are bad in all of the factions. Now the Fae and the barbarians generally are more inclined to be good. The ice lords are more inclined to be evil and bad. And the giants and the dwarves are sort of kind of in the neutral territory, kind of in the middle. But you can find allies and enemies in all of those factions, and all those factions have got their own agendas in the game. And so one of the things we had to do in the book was to represent that kind of weird political kind of environment that you wander into. And from the perspective of our heroes from the previous book, they wander into the Ice Mark very much unprepared for what's ahead. Okay, and so you know, imagine entering into a fantasy realm where you don't understand the politics of the land, and you've got different races vying for territory and fighting wars against each other all the time, and that's situation normal for Doomdark's Revenge, the environment. So we had to work very hard to try and, okay, well, how are we going to get that sort of political sort of tension, sort of everything's kind of vying for superiority in that, it's very unstable sort of situation, and try and get that feel into the book as well. So that was a big thing. There's lots of other bits and pieces about the Ice Mark which are different. So there are things like, there are tunnels underneath the map, and there's actually, somebody's already alluded to it, is that there's a very cheeky way to cheat the game. Actually, if you put the AI, such as it is in this game, is basically Shareth attempts to head towards Luxor wherever he is. She's kind of got an inside track to where he is at all times. But none of the NPC characters can use the tunnels. They're only for the perspective of the player. And Shareth will always head to where Luxor is. So if you put Luxor in a tunnel, Shareth will religiously zone in on him. And then when she gets to the point where Luxor is, despite the fact he's in the tunnel, she will just camp above him. And that was one of the first exploited ways to fix the game, is basically you could control where Shareth was. Basically use the tunnels. The NPCs you can't access the tunnels, they don't know they're there. So you basically park Luxor in total safety in this tunnel because the NPCs can't get at him. The enemy armies congregate above him, and then you can slowly pick them off bit by bit with your own armies, knowing that she won't move because she's basically homing in on Luxor. So there's a flaw in the game there, but and she thinks she's in that location, but of course he's actually below it. So that's a kind of I suppose a tactical bug with the way the game is put together. So there's a very easy way to win Doomdark's Revenge in that regard, but we didn't want to use that in the novel. That would be very, very bad. Naughty Hill, you got to go, no problem. I'm recording this, so I will upload it to YouTube as well. There's lots of other bits. So there's tunnels in there. The characters making autonomous decisions, which is quite clever. They're also linked in various ways. So in a sort of simplified medieval kind of pecking order. All the characters are organised into vassals and lieges. Okay, so you have a chief of the tribe, kind of, and everybody else is a vassal of various different levels below that. And if you manage to recruit one of the lieges, then you can usually recruit the vassals below him fairly straightforwardly, but not always. And there's quite a complicated relationship between whether or not you can recruit or whether you can't recruit somebody to your side. Whereas in Lords of Midnight, you just rock up and go, recruit, and the guy would go, yep, no worries, Luxor, I'm on your side. In Doomdark's Revenge, it's not so clear cut. You have to have compatible traits, and so on and so forth, and it's a little bit more complicated. So you can sometimes try and recruit somebody, and it will fail, and you end up in a fight with them. So there's all sorts of extra complexities in the game. In hindsight, did it make it a better game? In some ways, no. Some ways it didn't, because some of the strategies you could employ in Lords of Midnight just didn't work in Doomdark's Revenge because the gameplay was so almost random that it didn't work. One of the things that was very good in in Lords of Midnight as well was, and again, looking back on the box art, you can see you have a nicely portrayed. Let me just show you again. Nicely portrayed map, which is sparse but sufficiently detailed for you to be able to wander around and kind of use it to navigate. Okay, it's a helpful map. Okay. Doomdark's Revenge, by comparison, a very pretty map, but actually almost entirely useless for playing the game. So all you get is some major names, a few outposts, and a rather pouty, I assume it's Shareth up there at the top right, a rather pouty Shareth, and a and a dwarf, I'm guessing, in the middle. I don't know, Chris, do you know what this is? I've only really, in the last few weeks, I only just spotted it. Is that a dragon in the middle of the map? I suddenly looked at it, I saw there's some eyes peering out there. I never noticed it before. I don't know, is that a dragon in there? Or something? I don't know. So that's all you get. You get a not very helpful map. And that's all you're left with. So there's even less information for Doomdark's Revenge than you got with Lords of Midnight. You don't even have a proper map. It is a dragon. There we go. Okay, it's a dragon. Excellent. There's these eyes peering out of the map. I was thinking, what? I didn't notice that before. Did I put a map in the book? Yes, I did. Yes. Okay. So a few things I thought were important for modern readers. Okay. Now I've been showing you the ZX Spectrum version of the game. This is what it currently looks like. Let me just shut that down for a moment because Chris, who is on the stream tonight, Icemark UK, has recoded these games, and they are available for different versions. The one I've got is the GOG version, and it's an artist flourish. Excellent. And they have been kind of reinvigorated, probably is the right word, for modern games. And this is what they look like today. Let me just turn off that text there. There we go. They still retain the same feel as the original Spectrum games. And here we go. So if I start a new story, it tells you now a little bit of a nod to modern game. This is how you play the game. We're not just going to chuck you entirely at the deep end. And a little bit about the races of Icemark. But you can see the look and feel of the game is exactly the same. The graphics are much more high resolution, but it's exactly the same gameplay. Okay, it's exactly the same gameplay. So you can still replay these games. I know they have been in the past available on Android and iOS. I think that's something that's been kind of redeveloped at the moment, potentially, to make sure these games live on in the future. From a historical perspective as well. So that's stuff that is out there. So that's a work in progress, but to kind of keep these things up. To make sure the games find new audiences in the future. So there's all sorts of interesting bits and pieces that are potentially in the future there as well. The Winter Solstice. There we go. And now it's mouse driven, so I can look around with mouse control, and I get some helpful stuff. Okay, so the games continue, which is good, and a re-release. But they keep the spirit of the original, and they work surprisingly well on mobile devices. They're a natural actually for mobile, swipe and click and point kind of stuff. So and a re-release is hopefully coming. There we go. So that's basically what they look like today. But to go back to the map. Okay, so the map is hard work. All right. So let me talk a little bit about the map. So I struggled with the map because one of the things that you look at in the game with the map is and this is the original map here. Where is it? Display captures, probably that one. There we go. Let's move that off to the side. There we go. Now where's me? PC. Right, so that's the original map. That's a slightly better version. And all encouragement to Chris, because it's a mammoth effort. Okay, recoding these games for modern stuff and making sure you develop on a platform that allows you to maintain it. It's cross-platform in particular. It's very good. So this is the original map for Doomdark's Revenge. And I can't take my eyes off this dragon now. I really did not notice it was there before. But it's not a helpful map for for game playing, really, because it doesn't tell you enough. It doesn't tell you how to navigate. There's all sorts of detail in here which you just can't see. And when you're trying to play the game, so trying to play Doomdark's Revenge is quite hard. And for me, as I was writing the book, I was saying, how am I going to get a sense of place across to the players? And when you play Doomdark's Revenge, there are so many names. There are so many names, and the reason there are so many names is Mike Singleton used a kind of phonetic mechanism to construct names out of component parts. So a typical name in Doomdark's Revenge is something like Carothand the Fae, okay, and it's basically a conjunction of Car, Or, and Thand put together. And those are naming components actually to make character names. So an awful lot of the names in Doomdark's Revenge end up sounding quite similar. But every single location in the game has its own kind of name. There small regions, but there are there literally are thousands of them. So you'll be in the mountains of this, and you'll be in the in the forest of that, and you'll be at the stones of XYZ, and you'll be at the the tower of this and the tower of that, and it quickly becomes completely bewildering. So one of the things that I had, I spoke at some length with Chris, how are we going to simplify this so that readers get a sense of where they are on the map? Because the map is, whereas the Lords of Midnight map was actually something that you could kind of retain in your head after a while, the Doomdark's Revenge one just isn't as memorable in many ways. So one of the things that we did fairly quickly is we started thinking about, okay, can we come up with a better map, a map that actually works? And so we sort of simplified it. And this is the map that we did come up with. And so I'm going to just bring it in a little bit here. So down here is where we start. So there are certain locales that are very important. So the Gate of Varanorn is the entrance point into the Ice Mark, and we start off in the realm of the barbarians. This is quite important for the telling of the story. The barbarians have a capital, which is Imgrad. Okay, and there's a notable tower, a Tower of Zarathane there. Corenion the Barbarian is another key individual that we meet fairly early on. Then in the Land of the Fae, there are certain areas here that are important. Immerthorn players of the game will not be surprised as a key location as well. And Carothane and Thormand and Moraldrain, we'll talk about Moraldrain, and Lorangriel. These are all places that are familiar to the players of the game. Wouldn't the map be similar to the first books? Isn't it set in the same lands? No, it's not set in the same lands. So basically, the book will explain what happens, but the Land of Midnight is to the southwest of the Land of the Ice Mark. The Ice Mark is to the northeast of Midnight. So they actually have to travel across, or in fact underneath, the frozen waste, which are this impassable barrier between the lands, in order to even get to the place where they actually have to start the adventures. So there's, it takes them a while to even get started. And so what we try to do is a lot of the intervening detail which the game shows, and there are all sorts of lands in here, really doesn't help us in the story to kind of get a sense of the difference. So we've simplified the map in the sense we're trying to extract the key locales that are important in the story and use the map to sort of signpost them. So looking at this map, players of Doomdark's Revenge should feel instantly at home. Go, oh yeah, I know where that is, I know where that is, I know where that is. But the map is necessarily simplified to allow us to focus in on the key locales that are important for the reader to understand where they are. So there's still a lot of them, as you can see. There are a lot of cities, there are a lot of features on the map, but it is vastly simplified compared to the actual, if you like, digital map that's in the game. And there are key things like the mountain range of Anvilane and Anvermain, twin mountain ranges that have this sort of constricted valley in between them. There are some, what we've decided to call some passes, which do exist in the game. They're not called passes in the game, but we've kind of interpreted them as passes through the mountains for the sake of storytelling. There's one here called the Caramarg, and there's another one up here called the Moramarg, which are two sort of passes between mountain ranges. And there's another one that's strategically important here called Thudrain. There's another forest up here. There's a locked off city called Emerial, which is surrounded by the frozen waste. There's no way to get into it because you can't cross the frozen wastes. All those sort of things. And so the map is designed to help the reader know where the characters are. And kind of lock down the progress of different characters as they move through the story. And so you can go, okay, so Luxor's over here at the moment, Tarathel's over there at the moment, Rothron's heading this direction, and you get a sense of place. And we felt that was very important. And I like fantasy maps, okay? Spend a lot of time poring over fantasy maps just because they're important. So the map is very much simplified compared to the game, but it is still accurate to the game, only at a slightly higher level of detail. Moromog is more of a gap than the past. Yes, you're quite right. That's right. You're quite right. I think I called it a veil, I think, from memory. It's been a while since I looked at that section of the book. So that's the purpose of the map, okay? The map is simplified, but it's still accurate, and we wanted it to be a useful guide. So I think it is inside the book. And there's also and I'll show this to you. Very, very minor spoilers, but since the book is now available, you can now see this. So for the Dramatis Personae, we have a list. Let me just scroll that across, otherwise it's going to destroy the chat. There we go. So we have a description of the individual characters, who they are and what they do, at a high level, so that again you, the reader, know who you're dealing with. There's a big cast of characters in here still, not the full 128. As I stress, but there are a lot of characters in there, and this hopefully will help you to figure out who's doing what and what they're about. So there's a few more signposts in Doomdark's Revenge because by necessity I felt that it had to be there to help you get the best out of the story. So there we go. I remember in the game with a bit of luck you could attack a nice Lord army and get thrown over the frozen waves. Yes, that's right. There's a few little things that you could be. You could be either. I don't see Tarathel's horse in there. No, Tarathel's horse. I suppose I should have put that on the list of characters. It is in there. It is in there. It's not in this list, I have to say. No, Tarathel's horse is in the story, but it does have a name, named by Prentice McHone, very, very kindly on Facebook, but not in this list. Yeah, not in this list. So yes, so there is a map, and there is a list of the key characters to help guide your way through. Now the other thing that we were talking about obviously is the cover design. So you can see that obviously in the background, and you should be familiar with it now because it's been on the ebook. But we had lots of fun trying to figure this one out as well. So let me take you through some of the thinking that we had. So we started brainstorming ideas for the cover a long time ago now, but the artist Jure, who worked with us on this, gave us different kind of interpretations. So we started off with things like this. So here's an initial sort of sketch for what the book might look like. So we said, okay, well, how about we have the heroes emerging from the gate of Varannorn, and it was like, okay, a bit of head scratching. And then Chris said to me, have you written a description of the gate in the book? And I went, no. It says, quick, write one. So I did. And then the artist sort of worked off that, and we quite like this, but the problem with the gate view from our perspective was it was kind of a bit bland. It could be a big imposing thing, but it kind of didn't quite grab us for the story. And on the back cover we were thinking maybe of having Tarathel on her lonely quest to go and rescue Morkin. And again, whilst I was really, really keen to have Tarathel on the cover in some way, and I did lobby for it for quite a long time, but eventually I gave up, it didn't have enough drama in it. It felt a little bit kind of just not exciting enough. So that design kind of fell by the wayside. We did one of the other things that actually, just before we move on from that, one of the other things we did like, which we didn't like on this, was that we didn't like that it wasn't a wraparound cover, which we did have with Lords of Midnight. So that was something that we thought, okay, so we kind of do want a wraparound cover. So we want a continuous scene ideally across because this is the front on the right and this is the back cover on the back. Obviously it doesn't matter for the ebook, but for the paperback it's quite important. We didn't, what do we do with the spine in this situation? That starts getting complicated, and so that didn't work for us. We did have, then we kind of said, okay, what about interpreting on the, why not make the entire thing the gate? Okay. And then we kind of like, okay, so that sort of gives us a gate and some mountain ranges and stuff, and that's nicer. But then we were looking at this thinking, well, all we've got is a nondescript sort of rocky mountain on the back cover. Nothing's really happening there, which was like, no, that's still not quite working for us. Okay, so again, we're going through that sort of thing, and there are, you're quite right, Jan. I think the wraparound covers are much easier to manage for printing, because otherwise you've got to line up the spines really, really carefully, and that can cause you all sorts of pain and heartache. So we like the wraparound cover, but this was too bland. We decided this was too bland. The gate was a good idea because it's like the entrance point into the ice mark, but it didn't work. So that one dropped by the way. So then we thought, well, what about going the other way? So this idea came up. It's just quite nice. So there's the gate again in the background with the army sort of coming out towards us. The problem with this one was that all the interesting stuff was on the back cover, and if you kind of only look at this side, the front isn't strong enough. It kind of works in the paperback, but in the ebook version, all you get is the lead guy and his horse and a big expanse of sky, and that doesn't that doesn't work either. So that was problematic as well. And at this point, we're kind of like, we're kind of losing Taratha. We can't get this in, and we can't really get the gate in work. And it also felt too reversed from Lom. So just go back. Have I got the Lom one? Let me just go and get the Lom one for you. There we are. Nope, it's not that one. Where's the Lom? Oh, hang on, it'll be I'm in totally the wrong place. Let me just go find it. He says, searching through his file system. There we go, cover. So this is quite interesting. That's the draft. Shows the artist's process here. That's the draft image of Lords of Midnight. Actually, that's the draft image, and this worked in all sorts of ways. What we liked about this in particular was, do you want dawn? That's a key phrase from Lords of Midnight. So it's dawn. Okay, there the icy mountains in the background. There's a citadel. That's kind of key from Lords of Midnight. There's an army coming out, heading towards us. There's a village. There's a tower. There's a wyvern flying through the sky. Perfect. We love this. We absolutely love it because it works as a strong cover. There's enough detail on the back to keep you interested, but the front really grabs your focus. And that worked really, really well. And compare and contrast that with the actual cover image, which looks like that. That's the final version, obviously, of Lords of Midnight. So you get dawn, lovely pink sky. There's the citadel. There's the army. And you notice, I hope that they've even got the correct banners. So Lords of Midnight aficionados should recognise the banners there. There's the tower. There's the village. There's a forest in the distance. It's got the mountains. Brilliant. Okay, a really, really perfect piece of art. Doomdark's Revenge was much harder. So we were struggling with this business here with trying to find out what should be on the front and grabbing our focus. And no matter what we did with the gate, it didn't work. Okay, and then we thought, okay, so Taratha in the story is on her own a lot, so she's just a lone figure. So that kind of doesn't help us either. The gate doesn't work, so what else have we got? What's the definitive thing about Doomdark's Revenge? So then we started thinking about, what about Shareth? Okay, what about the evil woman who's is a key antagonist in this? And that's where we ended up with where have we gone? With later designs. So what we came up with initially was, can we have Shareth maybe on the front? Yes, and FYI, we still had a spine issue because Drew wrote too many words. Yeah, I'll do a word count comparison so you can see the difference. So this is the initial design. Put Shareth on the front, maybe keep the gate on the back, and then we kind of went through the thing again. And then the wraparound cover. We really liked the wraparound cover, and so eventually we settled on this one. and Chris very helpfully put some words on it so we could get a feel of what the thing would actually look like. And so this is the proof, if you like, does this work? And so what we've got here is Shareth with her armies fills out the front cover. We have to put Mike Singleton's Doomdark's Revenge on, in space. So there has to be space for that. But what we said, hang on a minute, there is this lovely scene with Doomdark's Revenge where there's this icebound city that's locked behind the icy wastes. And wouldn't it be nice to have the icy wastes, in there? Because we haven't seen the icy wastes in art before. So, the icy waste, this weird, sparky, sharp edge to the map. Let's see the icy waste. So bring us the icy waste. So this is the icy waste, and there's this ice-locked city in the background. And so this was the thing. And when we looked at this one, we thought, yes, this is it. This is the one we want. Okay, we've got Shareth. She's evil. We've got the army coming along. She's out in force. We've got the ice. The frozen wastes in the background. We have the sort of dawn effect because that's still part of the Doomdark story, and then we have the city in the kind of background. And then, obviously, as you know, you've seen it. We end up with, where's the actual? You can see it in the background. There we go. I'll just do it that way. There we go. There it is. Okay, I've got it as my desktop wallpaper at the moment. So that's that's what we ended up with. That's the process that we went through with the artist to try and capture. What a waste, I know. To try and capture the essence of the game, and it was quite hard this time to go, what is something that really grabs us for about Doomdark's Revenge? So that's kind of gives you the process that we went through, and Chris has already mentioned the length of the novel. Okay, so let me just show you, because I've got obviously I've got the files. Is there? And I'm a very old-fashioned writer in the sense I write in Word. I don't use any clever tools. I just use Word, and not even a modern version of Word, as you can see, which is a bit dodgy. But there we go. I know how it works, and that's important for me, that the tool does not get in the way of the writing process. So if I pop up the final version of where's Midnight? There we go. Midnight Chronicles. The final version of which is not in there for some reason. It must be final something else. Must be that one. There we go. So this is one of the kind of the final version that was sent to the publisher for proofing. You can see it is, in a moment once it comes up, 151,000 words. Okay. For reference, that's a little bit more than Fellowship of the Ring. Okay, so it's the individual book Lords of Midnight is a bit bigger than 1/3 of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Gives you a sort of sense of scale. 151,000 words. Now, Doomdark's Revenge is a more complicated story and it's bigger, and as a result, it's longer. Okay, and Doomdark's Revenge came out at a whopping 173,000 words. So it's 20,000 words longer. That's an entire novella longer than Lords of Midnight, which is a very large book. All right. Most fantasy novels generally in literary terms are long. Okay. In many cases, a fictional book doesn't even get to 100,000 words. 100,000 words is too much for many literary books. And having a book at 170,000 words is a proper tome. Okay, Doomdark's is a bigger book. Now that gives you problems, of course, because when you print a bigger book, believe it or not, it takes up more space. These are physics, all right? And as a result, you have to make sure that the cover wraps around that increased size properly. And so we had all sorts of problems trying to figure those kind of things out as well. Don't you find that a longer page count starts to gum up in Word? Basically what I do is I've never really had a problem with Word, to be honest. What I will do is I always give it about 2 or 3 minutes to load before I start typing anything, particularly when it's kind of got to a big length, because then it seems to sort itself out. If you start typing the moment you can see the beginning, it gets a little bit antsy, so I just tend to leave it when I'm sort of out my cup of tea, and then I come back and it's fine. I haven't had a problem, but your mileage may vary, so be careful. But it's a bigger book. Okay, it's a bigger book. There's the 2 word counts: 173 versus 151. Okay, Doomdark's Revenge is a longer story. And at one point, I was thinking to myself, I've got a feeling this might be 2 books. Doomdark's Revenge Part 1. and part 2, and then I thought better of it because I thought I might get lynched. So it is a bigger book. It is a bigger book to do justice to all the events that happen in it. I just couldn't do it in a short amount of time and not compromise what I felt the story was. So whilst it's 170,000 words, what I'm hoping for you guys as readers will be that, thank God Drew didn't condense this down anymore, because it still in some places felt like, I've got to keep going, I've got to keep going, there's more to tell, I've got to do justice to this, and I've got to do justice to that, and I've got to do justice to all these kind of things. And I think I've done it. Okay, with Lords of Midnight, I was kind of like, here I am, Drew Wagar, just this guy on the internet, and trying to to write this book based on a game that so many people love, and do it justice, make it not Tolkien, make it true to the game, make it satisfying for what is now an adult readership, as opposed to the teenagers and young folks who were playing it back in the day. And making sure it both captures the nostalgia, but it also pushes the story forward into a slightly more modern context, and it satisfies all of those things, and that's what I was attempting to do. And it was it is an ask, and it can't be perfect, but hopefully I did okay. And I think the thing with Doomdark's Revenge was I was conscious of that again. Okay, I've got to follow up the first story. I've got to do it as well as that. If I can improve on it, even so much the better. I've also got to definitively decide what Doomdark's Revenge, the story, actually is, and write that. And then, of course, what we've also got to do, and Chris and I have spent a lot of time working this out, is line up with the lore that does exist for what happens after Doomdark's Revenge that Mike Singleton actually had to pen, and set up the future exactly. Because we do want to continue these stories. Doomdark's Revenge is not the end. Monad says Scrivener is perfect for that. I have tried Scrivener, and I think I'm too old, too set in my ways. Yeah, you've already guessed it. I keep it in my head, and I find that works okay for me. I think it probably takes me longer to get there, perhaps, than it perhaps would if I spent a lot of time working on Scrivener. But I just find I tend to write chronologically. In my defence, I do tend to write chronologically, so it makes more sense to me if I just dive on straight through the story. I don't tend to chop and move things around. That's how I tend to do it. But it's a big thing. It's a big thing to manage. So are you going to write the rest of the 7 that were planned? Only 5 books. Well, I don't know. The 7, actually, I hadn't come across the 7 before. That's quite scary. There are tentative plans in place for 2 more, okay? Because that's as far as the original kind of, as far as I was aware. Chris will have to tell me a bit more about these 7. The original kind of plotted outlines of what the games were going to be. So there was supposed to be a follow-up to this one called The Eye of the Moon, which is to do with Luxor's moon ring and the story behind the ring. And that game was never made. Okay, that game was never made for all sorts of reasons. But there was an intermediate game called The Citadel, which did come out, of which I know very, very little about because I haven't really tried it, which does explore some of the lore as well. And what Chris and I are going to have to do is we're going to have to, because that game, Chris, tell me otherwise, because you know an awful lot more about it, but that one wasn't so much of a success. It straddled the era as we moved into the sort of 16-bit era, and all the consoles like the PlayStation 1, the PlayStation 2 were coming out. The game market was changing quite radically at the time, and the Citadel game didn't kind of hit the mark in the same sort of way as these early games did, and thus the Eye of the Moon never happened either. So we've got a little bit more carte blanche as to what we construct as the story for those kind of games, but we've got to figure out exactly what it is. There we go, 1995 and Windows 95 and publisher problems. Okay, so a series of woes and quite a long gap between 84 and 95. 10 years. Time has moved on by this point, and so we do want to continue these stories. And what we want to do is we want to keep Mike Singleton's legacy alive, and we also ideally want to bring new generations of gamers in to enjoy these games as well in a modern context. So there's challenges ahead for the sort of things that we want to do, but we do want to keep them alive, and we do want to keep writing fantasy stories in this epic world that Mike Singleton created. So Citadel was going to be Eye of the Moon, but might change it to stop the publisher getting rights. Okay. So, all sorts of complexities start coming in there. And the Citadel was very different in gameplay, and it didn't quite hit the spot like the earlier games. Okay, so the franchise, if you like, of the Midnight sort of set of stories kind of faded away from this point onwards, and it was fondly remembered by those who had played it in the 80s, but it was no longer in some ways quite so relevant. And Mike Singleton sadly was taken from us in 2012. So very sadly he's no longer around to steer this, and for all sorts of reasons, Chris is now the man who manages the IP on behalf of the Singleton family, and therefore is the creator of curator, shall I say, not creator, but he does create, but curator of the lore of the franchise. And so I'm obviously very privileged to work with him to kind of try and bring these to light in a narrative way. But Chris is also a coder, so he can do magic with computers and rebuild the games, which is something he's done many times. So there's lots of future potential, and we do want to head in those directions. And it's through creating the books and various other bits and pieces that gives us the mechanisms to do those kind of things. Because where there's an audience for the stories, then it's worth doing things, right? And so there are plans, and hopefully if Doomdark goes down well, as Lords of Midnight did, then then we've got there are further adventures to be had, shall we say? So there's all sorts of bits and pieces to be done. So the future is up for grabs, but that's kind of where we got to on that. So that's the actual length of the novels. Now, what else have I got to say about this sort of stuff? So the figuring out what the story was, trying to plot that, making sure the lore worked, and going back to the lore and saying, is this what Mike Singleton would have? Is this does this feel right? And that's Chris's watchword or watch phrase, I think, all the way through this is, when we're writing something, does it feel right? And Chris has pulled me up on a few bits and pieces, quite rightly, and I want him to. This is a very important part of the relationship between me writing a fantasy story and somebody making sure that it's heading in the right direction and it's sort of giving the right vibes and all those kind of things. Because it would be easy to I'm a very improvisey sort of person, okay, that's something that you do as a writer. But if I improvise too far, then I kind of break the law. I'm not reading it unless Shareth wins. Sundog, are the video games getting remade or something? Is it books only? I grew up playing these games. So the games are currently available on GOG. Oh, the Dove, yes, we need to talk about the Dove. We need to talk about Moral Train as well. We'll do that in a moment. So yes, the games are currently available on GOG. I fired them up earlier on. I can fire them up very quickly, actually, just while we're here. Where did I install them? eDrive, I think. They will be in GOG. There we are. So this is the latest one. So yeah, so you can play them again on your modern PC, which is really nice. Yeah, find them on GOG. And Icemark has Chris has outlined plans to they have been available on Android and iOS in the past. Unfortunately, those platforms are a moving target, so it's quite hard to develop for them and maintain things. But there are plans being investigated. So do wish him luck and give him a huge vote of support to get these games continually on those platforms. It's a lot of work, and it's tricky, difficult stuff. But what we are hoping to do is maintain Mike Singleton's legacy in his original games and try and bring new content to the Icemark and to Midnight through games and stories as well. So keep watching this space and keep giving both Chris and I a vote of encouragement. Say, yeah, more content, please, because that helps. That there are people out there who still appreciate the stuff and still want to play it and want more from this universe that Mike Singleton created. So yes, you can still play it, and it's got the same look and feel. as the Spectrum version, but obviously the graphics are that much more improved, but very, 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 very true to the original games. Yeah. The plot. I improvise around the plot, Glenn. Yes, I improvise around the plot. So those are quite good. So they are available. So you can get those kind of things and still play them. So that's good. The dove. Let me just talk about the dove for a moment. You think, what the dove? This was a major problem in the lore, actually. We had all sorts of issues. Okay, so we've established early on in the first game, and the game reinforces this. The frozen wastes, you can't cross them. Okay, they're the frozen wastes. They're the edge of the map. From a perspective of the actual original game, you can't go in there because that's the edge of the map. So around the edge of the map is the frozen wastes, and it's basically a barrier which you cannot pass. Okay, fair enough. And it's the frozen wastes. So basically, in the lore, if you try and go into the frozen wastes, you just die horribly because it's magic. Okay. And it's insanely cold and you die. Okay, so everybody knows not to go into the frozen wastes because they're impassable. And the game reinforces that as well, so that's fine. Okay, and that's in the lore and blah 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 blah. Good. Okay, until we started working on Doomdark's Revenge, and we didn't notice this straight away actually, and we wrote this whole thing at the beginning and blah 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 blah, and then we noticed, and it's in the original thing, and we made a point of it in Lords of Midnight. For those who don't know, there's a dragon called Farflame, one of the things that we had with the challenge with Farflame was, hang on a minute, okay, so Morkin meets a dragon, right? And the dragon can fly, right? So what's to stop Morkin just getting on Farflame and going, right, to the Tower of Doom, let's go? So we kind of had to think, okay, there's got to be something in the game and something in the lore that stops you just being able to fly to your target, demolish it with Dragonfire and come back again, okay? Because otherwise it's going to be a short book. And as a result of that, we decided that, well, actually Doomdark would know about dragons, so he must have had some sort of magical defense against dragons. Okay, and then we extended that to say, okay, well, maybe the dragons can't fly across the frozen wastes because if you can't pass them on foot, it kind of makes sense that you shouldn't be able to pass them by air either, because otherwise they're not quite the formidable barrier that we've set them out to be. So we have Farflame expose a little bit. He does a little bit of exposition saying no, not even a dragon can fly across the frozen wastes because it's just too cold and it's too magical and blah 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 blah. The frozen wastes are a barrier. Not even the dragons can pass them. Fine, no problem. Okay, and we got quite a long way into Doomdark's Revenge, and then we noticed that Mike Singleton had given us a problem. Okay, because early on, and I'll read it out. And here we go. So over at Immerthorn, Lord Immerthorn basically says, accordingly, as the night deepened, the Lord of Immerthorn climbed to the Tower of Hawks and took his swiftest bird, a white falcon, from the mews, and round one of its jesses he wrapped a thin strip of parchment, fastened it there with hot wax and pressed a seal upon it, and then unhooding the falcon he spoke softly to it and lofted it into the turbulent sky, and in a moment it was gone, winging its way towards midnight and the Citadel of Dreams. And then in the next chapter, Tarothel notices Falcon lands, and it's got a message, which is they're all able to read, which is starts them on their adventures. And Chris and I hadn't noticed this, and then suddenly we go. I suddenly sent an email to Chris saying, "Chris, I think we've got a problem here." And he said, "What's that?" And so there's this falcon that Immerthorn sends to the Citadel of Dreams. Yeah. Across the frozen wastes. Yeah. But we said nothing can get across the frozen wastes. And he went, yes. Okay. So we had to have a think as how this falcon gets across the frozen waste. And so we came up with a little reason for it, but it was one of those little lore things we thought, not good. So we had to have a bit of a think about that. So that was that one. So there's been the occasional odd lore thing that crops up that you kind of go, we're going to have to figure out quite how that works. And that happens a lot when you're trying to kind of rationalise things. But we got there in the end. That was good. So it's kind of is a magic falcon, kind of, sort of, a bit. But it's a blessed falcon. Yeah. But we can't get rid of it because it's part of the lore. Mike Singleton wrote it. And one of the things that we've watched, one of the things that we've been very strict on ourselves with the law is that if Mike Singleton said it was there, it's there. We're not deleting anything from the map in that sort of sense. So that's quite good. So that's important to us to make sure we preserve that aspect of it. And then we've got moral drain. Okay, now this is I think Chris's website is still working. So let me see if I can show you this, because this is something I was very keen to capture because it's part of the essence of playing the game. So let me just show you this. I think is it iSmart? I think it's iSmart.com. So if I go to Doomdark's Revenge here, where is it? I'm in the wrong place now. Where am I going, Chris? Gate of Aranon, that's the one. Okay, so what Chris has done here is he's extracted all sorts of useful information from the game, which is extremely useful for me. So there's this iSmart Who's Who, which tells me all the characters and who they are and what they do, and what army they've got and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of important. And you can get a sense here from the number of characters that are in the game. So this is all of the characters that are in the actual game, right? So there's all the Fae, here are all the barbarians, here are all the Ice Lords. Notice how many insane number of Ice Lords. Then all the giants and then all the dwarfs. Okay, so there's a lot of characters in there. But there are certain characters that you pick out and go, hello, what's going on here? Let's take an obvious one. Okay, so Luxor. This is the character breakdown for Luxor, the Moon Prince. So he's good, he's strong, he's forceful, he's generous, he's brave, and he's swift. Okay, so he's a good guy. Okay, Sheriff the Heartstealer by comparison, unsurprisingly, and it also says here loyal subjects, Terrafel the Fae and Brothel the Wise. Chain of command shows up there, and who their foe is. Okay, so the key foe is clearly Sheriff the Heartstealer. Right. Let's look at Sheriff the Heartstealer, and then she is kind of the opposite, but she's strong, she's forceful, she's stubborn, she's brave, she's swift, but she's evil, greedy, and treacherous. All right, so that's her character assassination, and surprisingly, she is the foe of Luxor, the Moon Prince. Okay, and everybody associated with him. There's her chain of command. Okay, so she's kind of in charge of the Ice Lords. But there are some interesting little oddities in here. There's some interesting little oddities. So if we look at, for example, the barbarians, most of them are kind of okay, but there's a few bad eggs. Okay, so if we look at the leader of the barbarians, who is a guy called Imgrad, there he is. Okay, so he is good, strong, forceful, stubborn, brave, and loyal. Okay, which is good. Okay. But if we look at Kahu Drag, the barbarian, what we have here is strong, forceful, swift, and evil. Okay, so he's an evil barbarian. This is excellent. Okay, so we've got some characters who are a bit dodge in the game. Now, the barbarians you kind of would expect to be maybe a bit of both. The Ice Lords, you expect to kind of be the bad guys. But what we do have in here is some interesting Ice Lords. There's Lorlorn, who is neither good nor evil. Interesting. He is strong, forceful, generous, brave, and swift, but he's not evil, and he's not good. Okay. So we don't have to answer that question in Mono. We don't have any characters who are good and evil, but we do have characters like Lorlorn who are neither. In the lore of the game, and we in fact even have one Ice Lord, where is he? Because this is in alphabetical order, which isn't very helpful. There he is, Talathane. We have one Ice Lord, Talathane the Ice Lord, who is good. What's going on here? He is strong, generous, swift, loyal, reticent, and fawning. So that's an interesting mix of things. So Talathane is a good Ice Lord, okay, even though he appears to be one of the baddies. So I was looking at this thinking, I've got to riff on that from a perspective of what's going on with these guys. Okay, so we need to pick that up. In the giants, we have good giants and bad giants, as you would expect. In the dwarfs, we have good dwarfs and bad dwarfs. So we have Glormain the dwarf, who is good, strong, forceful, stubborn, loyal, greedy, and slow. Which you have to work with. Okay, so at least I've got some character traits to play around with as a writer, which you didn't have in the previous game at all. It was totally faceless characters from that perspective. And then we also have, where's the other one that I did play around with quite a lot? It is Imgorag, who is an evil dwarf. Okay, so there are good and bad characters in all of the things. But surprisingly enough, particularly for the players of the original game, to whom the Fae were the good guys, okay, always on Luxor's side, most of the Fae are pretty good. So we have Imorthorn, who's kind of the leader of the Fae, really. He is good, strong, forceful, generous, stubborn, brave, swift, and loyal. He's just perfect. He's the perfect boss. Okay, so he's just a really good guy. You want Imorthorn on your side. His foe is Sheriff the Heart's. No ambiguity about where Imorthorn's loyalties lie. Right, that's really good. However, we do have characters like this one, Moral Drain the Fae. Okay, now Moral Drain is strong, forceful, swift, and evil. We have an evil Fae. How cool is that? Greedy, fawning, cowardly, and treacherous. Oh, yes. And as a writer, I'm going, yes, what's going on here? And interesting enough, look, Moral Drain the Fae's foe is Tarathil the Fae, our heroine. Okay, so what's happened between Moral Drain and Tarathil? Okay, well, the answer is in the book. And looking at these character traits from the game helped me to define what the story was going to be. So I was like, okay, well, there's some bad blood here between Moral Drain and Tarathil. What happened? Well, we go into that. Imorthorn is kind of absolutely with Luxor's agenda, but not all of the rest of the Fae are. So there's some dissension in the ranks. The barbarians can swing kind of either way. There are some good and not evil Ice Lords in the mix. What does that mean for the story? And that we riff off as well. Same with the giants, same with the dwarves. So the game lends itself to much better characterization this time round than Lords of Midnight did, which for a writer was quite refreshing. Actually, it was much easier to use. So that helped us build, I think, a much more compelling world. But it did mean that the story got that much bigger because we had to do justice to a lot more characters and a lot more situations, a lot more character building and various other bits and pieces. And then trying to present that on a simplified map and turning it into a fantasy novel that worked, making sure that we did play the game of Doomdark's Revenge, that people who read the book will recognise what happens in the story as, yes, that seems to be a compelling sort of sense of what actually happens in the story. And then making sure that what I call the Mike Singleton-ness of the experience was captured, and that we follow the lore, and that we set it up for future stories, and then that's the assignment basically. So that's what we've done. That's what we've created. And as a result, Doomdark's Revenge, the novel, is now there. So there we go, my friends. We have done a thing. And it's been a long hold slug, because I mean the other thing that to mention, just as kind of in closing really, is that we did all this through COVID as well. So I started working on Doomdark's Revenge before the COVID pandemic hit, and most of the work on Doomdark's was done during COVID. So before COVID, Chris and I had the opportunity to meet up in nice pubs, which was very conducive actually to at least talking about Doomdark's Revenge, if not actually to making any decisions about it. So that was very, very pleasant. That's definitely the way to write a novel and discuss the lore, in a pub over a pint of beer and some nice food. But COVID took that away for a long, long time. So we have to. We had to cope with COVID, and it was therefore Zoom conferences and email and Dropbox and stuff, which isn't as good, but it's needs must, alas. So it took us longer, or it took me longer because I was writing it, to generate this book, because it was just harder because of COVID. So apologies that it's taken so long for us to get here, but get here we finally have. So. So there we go. So I think I've covered everything I wanted to talk about in terms of where the book came from and everything. So for those of you who are still hanging around at kind of like 5 to 10 at night, if you've got any questions about that, any questions about the games, about the books, about the processes and everything, please do chuck them in the chat, because it is for me, it's closing a circle. It's unfinished business from 1984 that we need. There's this strange sense that we need to do this because it's unfinished business. It's unfinished work, and we need to close it up. It's something very, very fundamentally important from our younger years. that we feel compelled to finish, to tidy up, to make right, to tell the unfinished tales, etc. So there we go. So that's basically what it is. So yeah, all in the weekend, yes. What was the? Oh, here we go. Okay, so Bry 5940 says, what was the hardest thing to leave out of the book? I was very attached to one particular aspect of the quest, which I can't reveal for spoilers, but it concerns the rescue of Morkin. There was a particular thing I did want to include, but I couldn't make it work. I couldn't think of a compelling reason for it to be there, even though it kind of was a feature of the game to a degree. And I tried it 3 or 4 times, and I eventually basically looked at it and thought, this is just too contrived. It doesn't make sense to go that way. And so reluctantly, I've got about half a chapter of it that I keep in a not to be used file that every one of my books has. There's a whole bunch of stuff in it which I wrote but will never use. And so I've had to cut that out, and it is now in limbo on my hard disk, never to see the light of day. And I kind of didn't want to, but I couldn't make it work. So I had to basically find an alternative way of solving that particular problem. And I'm satisfied with how we did do it in the end, because it embraces a different part of the lore. But I couldn't use both of them. It was one or the other. And I had to make a call between two of them. I think I made the right call. I'm a little bit sad that I couldn't make the other way work, if that makes sense. Drelian says, the research for the books change your view about the games and the lore? I think it certainly redefined, because I started off both books. The research was basically play the game many times to kind of get an absolute feel for what happens. And what that showed to me was Lords of Midnight is much more of a strategy game, actually, than Doomdark's Revenge. Because with Lords of Midnight, you know roughly what Doomdark is going to try and achieve. You know he's going to try and take the map. He's going to try and take all of your cities and move to Zajikith or however you pronounce that name. And you know what he's attempting to do, and you know you've got to mount a defence. And so your tactics and your gameplay are all orientated around that particular problem, and then you've got Morkin's side quest. In Doomdark's Revenge, it's very hard to be strategic, because you've got no idea at any time what your opponents are up to, or even who your opponents are, because the game is very, very random. All you know is that Shareth is eventually coming to get you with an army, but she'll follow you all over the place, so you can keep her at bay by just moving around the map, because then you kind of lead her on the merry dance. So in some ways it's way less strategic and way less predictable, but I don't think it necessarily makes for better gameplay. So I came to the conclusion, actually, that Lords of Midnight is the better game than Doomdark's Revenge. A more memorable map, a greater sense of strategy and tactics in many ways. But from a writer's perspective, Doomdark's Revenge was much more interesting to write. So those are the conclusions I came to from a game-playing perspective and then a narrative perspective. I'm looking forward to start plotting and researching Citadel when Drew is free. So yes, we've got that up in our list of things to have a look at it. Will the reimagining of the Citadel be timed to match the book release? No pressure, guys. Couldn't possibly comment. It's probably the safest answer, I think, for my smart. I think in an ideal world that would be good, because books and games, I've always felt, do go hand in hand. They're different aspects of the same thing. If you want to play a game, that's one thing, because it's very interactive there and then. Whereas a book can drop you into greater detail and tell you what's happening behind the scenes. So it would certainly, I would like it if we could line that up, but that requires much magic to happen and many spells of fortune to be cast, I think, to make sure that all lines up. And that the development process for a game is very different from the development process for a book, and although they will share various bits and pieces in common. But if we can work together on figuring out what the lore is and then working out what makes a compelling game out of that lore, and then wrap a story around it. I think that, there's definitely some magic in there. So I think that will be really, really good. But alas, we can't give any commitments or promises at this stage. But if the reception to the books is anything to go by, and the previous versions of the game is anything to go by, it's good that the old players are still around and wanting to play it. And what we hope to do is bring in fresh players as well, who will be kind of, this is fun, this is new, this is slightly different, this is retro goodness in a way, but it's also modern in other ways. So so there we go. So that's good. Professor Alex, there is a direct line from the AR of Doomdark's Revenge, Midwinter, the Citadel. So there are connections in there. That's really good. So stay tuned is basically the best thing. Lalandra says, looking forward to reading all your books whilst away in no real internet for 3 months. Oh, that's what books are for, if you've got no internet. Definitely. And Icemark says, for those interested, there will be a modified LOM campaign next year that is closely based, I think that is closely based on Drew's book. So we did introduce, controversially, a few extra characters into Lords of Midnight, as you've probably spotted. So little things like that we felt were appropriate based on, partly it's the 21st century, and partly there were some odd things in the map of Lords of Midnight that we felt needed explanation. So we did. Some people will like those, some people won't, but we felt it was an appropriate thing to do at the time. We talked it through, pros and cons, as we always do on these things, and it felt good. So that's cool. So you'll be able to kind of play the book of the game of the book, as it were. So it's all good fun. So anyway, Doomdark's Revenge is now out there. So there's another chapter in my kind of things that I've done that is now coming to a close, which is always bittersweet for me. When I get to the end and type those kind of words. But I hope you enjoy it. We've had an awful lot of fun, and poured our heart and soul, I think, into the construction of Doomdark's Revenge. In terms of its look and feel, there's a lot of attention has been paid to the detail to try and capture that Mike Singletonness of the entire experience in a narrative form. Huge amounts of work from Chris. I've been slaving over it, and then there's been editing and all the other stuff that goes into a book that just has to go into a book. And that's all sort of stuff. Which got to go, says Mad Monks off. Take care, my friend. Be good. What chapter was the hardest to write? I think some of the middle stuff was, actually, because I kind of I knew how it started, because that's sort of set quite closely in tone by Mike himself. He wrote the start of the book for us, which is always easy. The ending was also fairly straightforward to write, but there were some bits in the middle where I thought, I'm trying to make sure that the character arcs, because you've got character arcs for the main heroes, so you've got Luxor and Tarathel and Rothron. They've got to have important things to do, so they have to go through arcs. There's obviously Shareth herself, what's she trying to achieve and where's she going? But then there's an awful lot of other characters, so you've got major representations from the 5 different things. And in the middle of the book, you're kind of going, okay, so are the dwarves going to pledge? What about the Ice Lords? They're doing something. What's happened to the giants? What's happened to the dwarves? What are the Fae doing? And trying to make sure that each race got kind of enough time in the spotlight, so that you as the reader were like, oh yeah, what do Fae do? There's the Fae, right, that's what they're doing. But you didn't kind of get lost in the kind of whole thing. Trying to make that punchy and exciting over a course of 170,000 words was a challenge. And those middle chapters I went through a lot, making sure it's like, is enough action happening, is enough stuff going on that's going to keep the reader focused and interested to get through, and get through to the the final scenes. So I think those are the hardest ones. Come the stuff in the middle of the book. It's like Street Fighter, the movie, the game. That's right, keep rolling that round. Professor Aronnax had the original copy back in the day and really enjoyed it, but mostly walked around the lovely Vauxhall landscape. The fact that you could tour around the game was quite a cool thing. Did you both have to be of Singleton mind to come to the consensus on the book? That's a very good question, Glenn. To be honest, most of the time, Chris and I generally find we come to the same conclusion, kind of independently. We do bat a few things about. But most of the time, actually, I think this is probably down to the fact that we've both played the game a lot. and I suppose in some, I'm speaking for myself here. I'm not speaking for Chris, but he can agree or disagree with me. But generally, I find that we've got a lot in common on quite a lot of different levels. So, with our familiarity with the game and our similar ages and probably the same sort of approach to how we think about things in many ways, I think we're usually quite closely aligned on what we think is appropriate and how things should work out. So we certainly haven't had any major fundamental disagreements. No, I'm not having a falcon in this book. We've always come to a landing on how we feel that the thing should be. And there's been occasions where Chris has said things to me like, this bit feels a bit weak. We need something in here that really drives this point forward. There was a piece right near the end that Chris asked me to put in. He says, "There's the ending." He says, "I like the ending, but there needs to be this punch about this particular topic near the end." And when I read through it, I went, "Yeah, he's absolutely right. Yeah, I need to put that in." So I basically quickly penned a few extra paragraphs to say, "Okay, maybe we can leave this as an aside in there to kind of bring out the flavour of this little part of the book that there's a little bit of kind of reflecting going on as the characters thinking, what just really happened here." And the characters take a step back to think about it, and then they're kind of a little bit worried for the future. And it was an absolutely brilliant thing that Chris asked me to write. And he said, "Yeah, but you go write it, Drew. Yes, that's your job." So I wrote it and thought, how can this fix? And then Chris basically said, "Yeah, that's just brilliant. That captures the sort of thing that I wanted in that little bit at the end of the story, just to give the reader a kind of, ooh, there's something else afoot here, kind of feeling to the the tail end of the story." So things like that, we collaborate really, really well. Because Chris will go, this feels a bit weak, or this needs to be drawn out a bit more. And I'll look at it and go, okay, well, let's try this. And I'll bang it across to Chris on Dropbox. And then Chris will go, yes, that's exactly what we need in that part of the story. Or can you bring out this, or can you bring out that a little bit more? What about so-and-so? He doesn't seem to have enough to do. So in the first draft, for example, Chris read it through, and lots of the comments got back with, character XYZ doesn't do enough. Or this is a really important thing that this character is doing, and there's not enough about it in the story, so I'll have to go back and expand upon that. And that's our kind of creative relationship. Is Chris will look at it from a kind of, does it feel right? Feels a bit weak here, not enough about it here, and then I'll go and expand it, send it back to Chris, and then we bat that back and forward a number of times until we're happy that we've kind of satisfied each other, if it makes that sense. So there we go. It helps I trust what Drew is doing. Yes, there we go. Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate that. When they get back to the gate of Varanon, it's chained shut. Yeah, they forgot to leave it propped open. So there we go. So it's all good. But it's a very healthy creative relationship, and it works well. And I think we've now been able to hopefully both prove to each other and prove to all the fans out there that we can construct something that's worthy of what Mike Singleton left for us in terms of a legacy, but also is true to what he, hopefully something similar to what he would have written if he had had the time to do so, and satisfies both the nostalgia but also the needs of storytelling kind of in a contemporary setting as well. So there we go, my friends, there we go. Thank you very much. I have enjoyed wittering on for 2 hours about this, so hopefully it's not too waffly, but thank you very much to everybody involved. Obviously, shout out to Chris, shout out to Jura the artist, to the team at Fantastic Books who published it and put it all together. This isn't the end. This isn't the end. We do fully intend to keep going forward with the stories as well. And all the time you guys are out there in terms of an audience, then we want to continue that legacy and write more stuff. So it's a fantastic, lovely little enclosed universe of fantasy storytelling, which and there are more stories to be told. So let's see what the future brings. So thank you very much, everybody, and I will close off there. Let you go and get some, and I'll stick this up on YouTube for those who have not been able to watch the whole thing. But it has been it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's been a lot of hard work, but it has been a lot of fun as well. As any really worthwhile creative endeavour is, I think. Chris, I think it's great that you guys have been and are still doing this. Lords of Midnight wasn't part of my childhood. I was 3 months when Lords of Midnight came out, but I love the passion for the project. Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate that. And take care, everybody. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks, Chris Icemark, for popping in and giving us sage counsel as ever. And and obviously, if you want to buy the book, that would make us all very happy as well. So There we go. I suppose I ought to pitch it a little bit right there at the end. But take care, my friends. Thank you very much. I'm back on Thursday for my No Man's Sky's Christmas Pressel. I think we'll do some retro stuff on Saturday as per normal, and then I think I've got one more Christmas special for the writing community back next Monday, and I think I'm off for Christmas, so there we go. There we go. Lovely to see all of you on the stream. Thank you very much for all the comments and all the interaction. It's always a pleasure. So enjoy, and go forth and slay Shareth or whatever needs to be done, or maybe not, depending on who you want to win. Take care, my friends. Thank you very, very much. Be good. Have a fantastic week ahead, and I will see you all soon. Onwards, and as always, right on.
A story, you say? I can tell many a tale, but I dare say some are too dark for young ears such as yours. Perhaps you recall the tales of your ancestors, of when the land of midnight was frozen all about, with endless snow and a winter that never ended. Oh, you can laugh, young traveller, but such things as you have heard really took place long moons ago. These mountains were as ice. None lived in these parts. The Witch King, yes, that was all his doing. Of old he was called Gryphallon the Stargazer, but doubtless you would know him as Doomdark, casting the land of midnight into the cold and the dark. Yet there was more besides. His greatest weapon stole your courage, your very fortitude away, turned brave warriors into trembling cowards. The Ice Fear. More died from terror than died by the sword. His armies issued forth across the plains of Valethor, sweeping all before them. The bloody sword of battle brought death across all midnight. Did we want dawn? No. We dreaded it. Across the plains of blood, Doomdark's armies came. Past Shimmerl, Izarath and Dawn, Kumar and Maraketh fell in the attack. His foul armies fought down through the valley of Correlay and up to the very gates of Zajakith. The fate of midnight hung by a thread. Oh, you're right. He was vanquished. The heroic efforts of the newly revealed Moon Prince and his son, the Free and the Fae united together. Even the dragon and the Skulkrin played their parts in the destruction of the Ice Crown. He was thrown down, his lands sent to wrack and ruin. Doomdark was slain. And we thought that to be an individual. Little did we know. So you don't know this tale, eh? Not so many do. It happened far from here. Throw another log on the fire. It'll not be long before dawn breaks. From across the frozen wastes our doom was foretold. A white falcon was the messenger, sent by the Fae far to the north, in a realm called the Icemark. Tidings of doom, a fell empress, a sorceress, steeped in evil alike to Doomdark himself, but infused with wrath, anger, and the tempests of youth. Ruler of the Frozen Empire was she, and she swore bloody vengeance upon us. Why, you might ask? A good question. We did not know for some time. But then I discovered the reason. Now you want to hear more, do you? That tale is not for the faint-hearted. Perhaps another night, when the wind does not blow quite so cold. Then, perhaps, I will relate the tale of Doomdark's revenge.